With the recent release of the G9 Mark II comes the question, what is the best micro four third camera to buy in 2024? And hopefully I'll be able to answer that question by the end of this video. And I'll be comparing the two flagship micro four third cameras from Lumix, the GH6 versus the G9 Mark II. While I love the GH6 and I am absolutely a huge fan of it, it has a lot of features that's missing in comparison to the G9 Mark II, and also vice versa. So I'm going to explain all the differences between these two cameras, what you should consider before buying, and which camera might be right for you. And thank you to the sponsor of this video, Audio, but a little more about them later. Before we even talk about the specs of these cameras, the physical build, and everything else, the first thing we need to touch point on is going to be the price. You can buy the GH6 new at $1,700 and sometimes even cheaper than that. And you can also buy it used around that $1,000 price point. Versus the G9 Mark II, right now, currently as I'm recording, buying it used is going to be costing around $1,700, which is the same price buying new for the GH6, and buying new on the G9 Mark II is going to be costing around $1,900 to $2,000, depending on when you purchasing it. Again, you can buy used from various places and that price could be hugely ranged, but it's pretty obvious right now that buying the GH6, especially since it's an older camera, more people have it, more people are trying to sell it, you're going to be able to get a better price and a better bang for your buck. That little bit of that difference, maybe that $200 to $500 to maybe even $600, $800, can buy you a couple more lenses, a couple different camera equipment, and that's something definitely to consider when deciding to purchase one of these two camera systems. But let's now move on to the next point, which is going to be the physical build of the cameras. The G9 Mark II is actually the same exact body type as the S5 II and IIX, just with two buttons and obviously a micro four third sensor instead of a full frame sensor. While the GH6 is kind of its own body style completely. It's different than the GH5s and any of the other GH line. It's a completely brand new body style. And I'm actually a huge fan of it. It's similar to when they released the S1H type of body style with the flip up camera, the sideways flip. This is the feature I've been missing shooting on the S5iiX, shooting on the G9 Mark II, is this stinking feature right here. Being able to have a monitor straight down when you're recording is really, really nice. Now, the thing that I also love about Lumix cameras entirely is that they're extremely customizable. So on both of these cameras, they have a lot of similar buttons, layouts, like the two front function buttons. All the buttons on the back are pretty much almost identical, sort of in a different placement, but they are basically able to do the same thing. What the GH6 has is a couple extra buttons and features and knobs that the G9 Mark II doesn't have. For example, the first one is being this lock feature. You can obviously customize this to a button, but that's a button you shouldn't have to customize with the GH6. It already has an extra little feature here being the lock feature. So on the GH6, when I turn on the lock feature on the back, everything is not locked except one dial, and that one dial is going to be my shutter angle or my shutter dial right here. And then I can unlock it and change it really quick. Versus on the G9 Mark II, I don't have that button customized to any of the function buttons, even though you can. What I end up doing is I turn on synchro scan, and whenever I accidentally bump this dial, which I tend to do pretty often, it only is switching my shutter angle by a degree instead of 20 degrees. The next button that this camera has that the G9 Mark II doesn't have is going to be an audio information button. This is a button designed to show you all your audio features on this camera. Now, again, you can customize this on the G9 Mark II into a customizable button anywhere on the camera basically, but this is another button you have to use instead of using something else. Now, the last button that I actually love the most over the GH6 over the G9 Mark II is going to be this front record button. There's so many scenarios where I'm holding the camera with a top handle and I want to record. I either have to awkwardly take my hand off and hit record, or I have to kind of do this workaround with my left hand to press record. But on the GH6, it's so simple to just hit record, film my thing, stop record right here. This is definitely more seen on cinema cameras like Red, for example, that have a front record button. It's a more professional feature, and that's what I love about the GH6. It just feels like a more professional camera. Now, the last big feature that the GH6 that has over the G9 Mark II and the physical body is going to be the fan. The fact is, the G9 Mark II doesn't have a fan. So if you're recording long periods of time, you're recording for hours on end, you could potentially run into the issue of overheating on the G9 Mark II. But if you're planning to be a run and gun filmmaker, you're not recording for hours on hours on hours on end, you're not in the dead of heat in a desert, you probably could get away shooting on the G9 Mark II. It's just something to consider. If you need a fan and you want internal fans, the GH6 is going to be the one that makes sense. Now, the G9 has a couple features that I also really like about this physical body. The first and biggest one is going to be that dual SD card slot. Even though there is definitely some advantages of having a CF Express Type B card slot in the camera, especially if you want to record Apple ProRes actually internally in this camera, and that's advantages for weather sealing that the GH6 has. It's just having a dual SD card slot is super nice, especially if you are on long shoot days, you're not with all your camera gear, you are a run and gun filmmaker. Having two SD card slots to have two 128 gigabyte SD card slots makes it easier, and it makes you have to not switch out the cards as much. Now, with the menu systems, they're basically identical between the two cameras, with only a couple features and settings that one camera may have over the other. Now, one little gripe that I do have with just Lumix cameras in general is the fact that you can copy and paste your menu systems from one camera to the same camera, but you can't copy and paste your GH6 settings to your G9 Mark II settings. Now, if you're interested in getting all my personal settings and seeing an entire video on how I customized my Lumix cameras, I will be releasing super soon, and it might already be in the description below, my menu settings and systems for the GH6, the G9 Mark II, and the S5iiX. Now, this section of the video, I'm not gonna get really into the nitty gritty between all the video specs of these cameras because they're basically the exact same. The G9 Mark II basically has all the video settings that the GH6 has. Now, there was going to be the advantage of external recording into B-RAW and Apple ProRes RAW for the GH6, but with the recent firmware update that Lumix announced, that's no longer an advantage of the GH6. You can record Apple ProRes RAW and B-RAW externally via Atomos monitors or Blackmagic monitors in the G9 Mark II. And the last thing I want to touch about video specs and stuff is going to be the unlimited recording. Now, both these cameras do have unlimited recording. With that said though, the GH6 kind of has more true unlimited recording with a couple quirks. What I mean by that is with a dual SD card slot, you're able to record into one card, and then once that card is about to be full, it's gonna switch you to that next card, and then you can replace this card, take that card out, and put in a new SD card and have true unlimited recording that goes on and on and on. While you can do this on the GH6, it tends to get a lot more expensive having CF Express Type B cards and SD cards both on hand instead of having just one card system. Now, the little quirk that the G9 Mark II has though is it doesn't have a fan, so you can end up overheating, which kind of ruins the whole point of having unlimited recording. Little quick disclaimer from this portion of the video. I actually ended up just being on a shoot the other day with the G9 Mark II, and I had the camera on for 5 hours straight, recording on and off throughout that entire process. I was outside, it was probably around 60 to 70 degrees outside, so it wasn't crazy hot. It was on the entire time. It was powered by a V-mount battery. All right, I'll let you get back into it, but the next point I'm about to make might be a little bit silly based off what I'm saying right now. I haven't had a ton of situations where I am running into the G9 Mark II overheating. I have used this camera on 30 to 45 minute interviews and even sometimes hour-long interviews, and still not a ton of issues. I have not tested, with that all said, for 2-hour or 3-hour shoots using the G9 Mark II, but that is something I would trust if you're needing a 3-hour long camera or you're needing a camera for long podcasts. The GH6 might make a little more sense. Now moving on to the autofocus, which is probably the biggest thing that you are most curious about. Now I'm going to be doing an A/B test between the two cameras, and I'm actually really curious to think if you can tell which camera is A versus which camera is B, all while reading the sponsor for this video, which is Audio.
Have you heard of Audio? Let me tell you about that. Audio is a music and sound effects licensing company with thousands of tracks and artists to choose from. But wait, there's a little bit more. One of the coolest features though is called Link Match AI. Link Match AI can basically take any link from any site. This could be YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, even SoundCloud, if you're still using SoundCloud. And then it's gonna find you similar sounding tracks based on whatever song that you put and whatever link you put into Link Match AI. Now, this not only helps you save hours of searching, but it also helps you find the best song. Now, this is a feature I am so stoked to have. Whenever I see that fire Instagram edit and want to use similar music, I can find it super easily with Link Match AI. This is available with an Audio Pro subscription, which they're giving me to give you a discount.
Just go to audio.com and use the code DANE70 for 70% off your first year. Thank you again for Audio for sponsoring this video. Now, before I give you guys the answers for which one was A and which one was B, I'm really curious to see if you were able to guess which camera was A and which camera was B. So, drum roll, camera A was the G9 Mark II and camera B was the GH6, which probably was pretty obvious. I feel like when I was watching and even filming these tests, it seemed like it was a pretty obvious which one was A and which one was B. G9 Mark II's autofocus is just unparalleled, especially in comparison to the GH6. So I was using the exact same camera settings, the exact same color for both of these grades. Everything was the exact same lens, the exact same settings, everything. With that said though, when it came down to it, I just felt like the GH6 performed so much better. It felt like it was so much quicker. It was able to actually detect where I was in the image, and it was way more smooth. Now, I feel like this is kind of the biggest downside to the GH6. I really wish that the GH6 just had phase detect autofocus like the G9 Mark II was. I would have even waited an extra 6 months or even an extra year for the GH6 if it had phase detect autofocus. Now, color, which this is going to be the debatable section in this video, but for myself personally, I kind of like the G9 Mark II color over the GH6. I feel like the skin tones are just a tad bit more natural. It looks definitely overall a cleaner image. With that still said, it's definitely a little bit more sharper than the GH6. The GH6 gives that more of a natural color, but I feel like it has way too many greens in the image. And also, this was something that I personally noticed on the G9 Mark II versus the GH6. The G9 Mark II, when I put a LUT on it, the LUT looked more accurate to what the actual image was gonna look like when I put it in my video editing system. Versus the GH6, I had the exact same LUT on it, and for some reason, the image just looked super contrasty. It was hard to actually view the image with the inputted LUT. Maybe this can be easily fixed with a software update. It just felt like the look and LUT was more contrasty and not as accurate to what I was seeing on the computer. Now, before we move on from color, there is one big con that the GH6 has, which is streaking. Now, this has not been really fixed in any of the firmware updates, but it's been a noticeable issue, especially when you're filming anything with a ton of high contrast light. You can have some pretty bad and extremely noticeable streaking issues. Now, it's not an end all, like this camera's not worth buying because of the streaking issues. Though, if you're filming any products, especially on a black background, these streaking issues will definitely be noticeable and end up almost ruining a clip sometimes. Quick little interruption from me, guys. If you've been enjoying this content on the GH6 versus the G9 Mark II, definitely consider subscribing. It helps out this channel, helps me grow, and I appreciate it so much. Anyways, I'll let you get back into the content. Now, finally answering that question, what's the best Micro Four Third camera to buy in 2024? Well, it's got to be the G9 Mark II. Now, with that said, there is a couple of reasons why you might still want to buy the GH6 over the G9 Mark II, and I'm going to give some recommendations on who should buy the G9 Mark II and who should buy the GH6. So let's start off with the G9 Mark II. Now, the people I recommend to buy the G9 Mark II, the first one is photographers, just in general photographers. If you are focusing mainly on photos first, I know I talk a ton about videos, but the G9 Mark II is definitely a photography camera, and it's an absolute beast at it too. Now, the second category for who I think the G9 Mark II is for is any filmmakers slash YouTubers who need autofocus. The fact that the G9 Mark II can have a hand go up, be in focus, have it come out, have your face be back in focus is really nice, and that's why I highly recommend getting the G9 Mark II if you need autofocus. Now, for the GH6, I really only have one category who I really think might want to buy this camera at this given time. And that's for the people who are shooting mainly on cinema glass or cinema lenses, or don't need autofocus and are cool with just manual focusing most of the time. The GH6, it has a better form factor, and it feels more natural in your hands. It feels better when you're ever shooting B-roll. It's smoother, it's a lot faster with the tilt up screen, the front record buttons, and the other extra features on the physical body itself. This camera makes a lot more sense for the filmmakers who don't need autofocus. And if you're on the fence about buying the G9 Mark II, maybe even over the S5iiX, I have a video talking all about that right here. And then YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Until next week, guys, peace.